Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the latest Curvivore Coffee Break. We're going to wait 1 second as people file in virtually, and then get on with it. Going to wait a few more moments, then we'll get started.
Recording in progress.
Did you guys hear that echo?
Yeah, I can hear it.
Yeah, I think that was me. Sorry, but anyways, let's kick things off. I think more people will join us, but yeah, everyone, thank you so much for taking your afternoon to join this Curvivore Coffee Break fun webinar in Stowe. It's learning from lockdown, creating vibrant urban spaces for citizens and shoppers. As you can see from the screen share, we've got a great gathering here. We've got Adrian Hoff, a steering committee member from Streets for All, Antonio Dixon, founder and creative director of SolarFi, and Ariane Devani, who's head of partnerships and policy at Automotus. And to start things off, we're gonna do a little bit of show and tell. So I've asked each one of these great speakers to bring a photo of what they think a fantastic kind of contemporary, curb that works for everyone is. And so we're going to start with this one. And Adrian, what do you like about this?
What I really like about this is, even though there's still cars on the street, it doesn't prioritize cars. The curb is not being wasted by for parking purposes. There's a nice protected bike lane there. And something that I haven't seen before is the bike lane actually kind of meanders to create a space for what looks like alfresco dining. And I think that's really cool. So it's actually more of a people-focused curb. And because of that meandering bike lane, it also creates a space for vehicles to do pickup and drop off and deliveries as well, without having to block a bike lane or traffic lane.
Got it. Yeah, I like what I see. And then Antonio, tell us a little bit about this this lovely creation here. Up and you're on mute.
I'm on mute. One thing I love about this is actually fits right in Adrian's project, right? So we did this on 5th Avenue and 23rd Street in Manhattan at the largest artisanal restaurant chain in the world called Italy. It's right in the Flatiron District, and there's cars going by, but we can still have outdoor dining. We have Bluetooth solar speaker lanterns inside. All of our pods are solar powered, and it enabled people to have social distance dining. They can have romantic get-togethers with their loved ones or getting together with friends. And we didn't have to waste this curbside. Restaurant chains like Italy didn't have to just only allow customers to sit outside when it's cold. They were able to have their own private dining experience. So we're excited about doing that here, and we're doing something similar at the University of Alabama, where we're creating outdoor street markets and utilizing our solar pods. So I love the fact that we can turn something that has just been wasted into something that's sustainable and adding to the beautification of a city or a college campus.
Got it. And then what's the turnaround time for one of these look like? Like, how long did this take?
We can put those up in about 2-3 days. Our lead time for order is about 3 to 6 weeks, but once we have the order, we set up. We usually bring most of them in pre-assembled, so we can line up 20 of them in about 2-3 days. We did New York Fashion Week with this as well. Social distance modeling. They didn't have to shut down New York Fashion Week for social distancing. They were able to have the models be outside and showcase the different clothes from the street.
Very cool. And then Ariane, what are we looking at here? Why is this a good curb?
Yeah, so we're really excited about this. And for reference, Automotus is a curb management company. And so Santa Monica and Los Angeles just launched the nation's first and second zero emission delivery zone in the country. And so this is an example of one of those zones in action. This was 2 weeks ago, where Mayor Garcetti just did a ribbon cutting at this zone in Little Tokyo. And so, what we're seeing is cities like Santa Monica and Los Angeles are dedicating zones for free access and parking for all electric vehicles. And this goes on with, some of the policy and infrastructure changes and promotion of the electrification of vehicles to meet some of our long-term goals. And so what we're seeing is everything from sidewalk delivery robots to e-cargo bikes to fluid trucks, which are all electric. And so this is pretty exciting. And the Department of Energy just issued a $4.2 million grant to expand this small pilot into more than 200 loading zones. And so, once some of these infrastructure gets added, what we're going to see is a lot of these fleets are going to be incentivized, and we're going to see a lot more electric vehicles out there and places for them to park for free. So really exciting stuff going on in Los Angeles.
That's super cool. Can you maybe like get a little bit more into the details? Like, does that mean that both a FedEx truck over here, a food delivery bot there, a scooter, like are all these things all kind of like going where they're supposed to go now? Like what is?
Well, that's the goal, right? So, what we do is we put cameras up, and without collecting any personally identifiable information, we automate these shared use spaces and turn them into more like mobile terminals. So fleets no longer have to get out of the car and pay for parking, or have to park in the middle of the road, or park in the middle of a median, or blocking up a bike lane. And in a lot of these cases with these short-term deliveries like food delivery, grocery delivery, Amazon, where they're only parking for a few minutes at a time and it's highly congested areas, there's really not enough curb space. And so these shared use spaces that are existing, what we're doing is finding ways to better utilize them, and then find ways to reallocate space where there's not currently enough dedicated curb pickup drop-off zones. And we're using data and computer vision to help guide some of that. So, the ultimate goal is to align the policy with the demand.
Love that. Love that. And a quick reminder to our audience, the last 15 minutes or so of this, we're going to be opening up to questions from all of you. So please, if you see something that makes you think, feel free to put it in the Q&A box now. And in the last 15 minutes or so, my colleague Luke will pick from those. I wanted to share one more photo, which is one that, I happened to take, but I was in Huntington Beach. And to me, it's sort of like a great example of, it's kind of got a little bit of everything, where it's a full street closure. You've got vendors. You also have, I don't know if you can see here, but sort of, sidewalk dining build outs. And what I thought was interesting about this was not just that, it happened to look pretty good, but, for people that don't know SoCal politics, Huntington Beach is not the most progressive city. So it's sort of, I think, talks about how these, good curb designs, good urban street spaces can sort of transcend politics. And I think kind of that makes me think about, what are political strategies for getting, better streets done? Adrian, any thoughts from Streets for All? And you're on.
I think it's really important to do that outreach with all of the community members, get the businesses on board, because a lot of people kind of erroneously think that cars equal business. But we see it in spaces like that in Huntington Beach. Ventura did the same thing with their Main Street. And Streets for All co-sponsored an event in August in Koreatown where we did an open streets project. We closed off 2 blocks and in a corridor that has a lot of small businesses. And there was some apprehension amongst some business owners there, but it was a really vibrant event, which drew so much commerce to that area. And everywhere you looked, you saw people carrying to-go bags with sandwiches and barbecue and boba cups. And so having that street closure where it was people focused just encouraged folks to go out and enjoy the businesses and kind of hang out and make new friends. And the longer they stayed, the longer they shopped. And even if they didn't purchase something then, they made a mental note. Oh, look what's over here. Let's check it out some other time.
Got it. Very cool. What is like the ideal outcome for one of these, kind of street reimaginings? Arian, like what does success look like to you? And you're on mute again.
Apologies. Yeah, so success is, there's no silver bullet, right? And things aren't going to change overnight. But really giving cities tools and really acting as a liaison between cities and some of these players at the curb has been key to success, is really building the ecosystem. Because in a lot of cases, and there has to be like a winner or a loser, and it's either one person is the fleets look at it as a loss because they have to start changing their operations or having to pay for something that they didn't. But what we're seeing in discussions with a lot of these fleets and cities is, one, cities are open to sharing data and collecting data from these private companies to reimagine the curb and repurpose it where needed. And fleets, if given an opportunity to have a seat at the table, are willing to share data that's really powerful and valuable for these cities. And so the solution at the end of the day comes in more dedicated curb access, and comes from a collaboration of data on both ends, and creating a partnership and policy framework that works so that we can really deploy this infrastructure and keep up with the demand. Because as fleets are electrifying, we need more incentives like zero emission delivery zones. As food delivery and grocery delivery continue to increase, we need more dedicated pickup drop-off zones. And so yeah, it's not going to happen overnight, as mentioned, but using data, I think, is really key, and having everybody a part of the discussion.
I guess, let's say you're talking to a new city, and you're like, hey, your curbs don't work, your street's a mess, this isn't working for anyone. What are they looking for as a sign of success? Is it, less congestion? Is it, more revenue? Is it, accessibility? Like, kind of what are the North Stars of a good project? I'll shoot that down. Whoever wants to take it, let's say.
I would say, what we do is we usually try to get the bids involved, the business improvement district that are looking to improve the revenue for small businesses. We talk about how much, extra tax dollars are going to be able to generate, how many businesses are not able to get people to come indoors. And, when the business goes out of business, that hurts everyone. So like, how do we keep people in business, and how do we keep people happier, right? Like when people are outside, they're happier, they're excited, and they usually spend more money. So, talking about those different things. Other things we try to include in that is like public art. So if you include public art within that, I think people get really excited about that as well.
Adrian, is there a North Star that Streets for All points to when you're kind of trying to convince cities to make a change?
Just kind of getting all the stakeholders and the elected officials on board. I find that a lot of elected officials will kind of come around if there's evidence that the stakeholders want it. There's certainly some electeds that will not bend and will not implement projects like this, no matter what you show them. But for the project that we did in August, fortunately, we were working with a council member who was who kind of takes a stance of whatever the people want, I will work with that. And so we were taking survey data just to kind of show, like, the people like this, they loved this event, and they want to see something like this permanent. So we're hoping that that's going to drive more projects like that. So doing that outreach, collecting that data, and just showing that evidence that people like these kinds of projects, and it's good for business.
Got it. Antonio, like, let's talk a little bit about like the physical infrastructure, the metal, the concrete, the plastic. Like, what does it go to taking a successful street?
As far as the ground, I'm not sure if I understand the question.
Yeah, like to you, I mean, you're in the business of building things that look good and last. Like, what is beyond obviously SolarFi's products? Like, how do you see that in a mix of, are there cones? Is there something more attractive than cones? Is there bollards? Are there outdoor dining setups? Like what does a good street consist of?
We try to like keep it with Mother Nature, right? Adding trees as barricades instead of normal barricades, and adding lights to that. Like, barricades are ugly. No one wants to see that. I mean, one way you can make the barricades art. We haven't done that before. That's something that we can certainly try. But I definitely do believe, like, in creating like in the colder months, we created like a winter wonderland. So when you see that excitement and you see all these different, I don't know the name of the trees, but when you see the trees just lined up, it grabs people's attention. It makes people stop and actually want to dine at that restaurant or buy something in that environment, because it's beautiful. People like walking into beautiful areas. They do not like walking into areas that are unattractive.
Got it.
But I would say lighting and trees definitely help.
Lighting, trees. Arian, Adrian, anything else you guys look for in a kind of successful street intervention?
And I think everything was kind of hit upon. I agree with Antonio that having a beautiful, vibrant space is really important. Having trees, good lighting, even art, preferably art that's community-based, is going to make it that much more attractive.
And so, Arian, this one's for you, but yeah, there's the physical layer, right? There's the, you know, what it looks like to us humans, and then there's the sort of the digital infrastructure layer that goes to making like a street that works. Can you talk a little bit about, like, you know, what we can be doing on that realm?
On the digital side?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you know, there's organizations, it's a collaboration, right? I think one is it's important to have a baseline for cities to use, where you know, there's set privacy standards, for example, open source standards. And you know, we're proud to be a part of the Open Mobility Foundation, which consists of over 30 cities like San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, Austin, Boston. And I'm a part of the curb management working group there, where we meet with a lot of these curb managers is a new title that's being thrown around. And you know, consistently working together to create those standards, I think is really important. What we're seeing is, once you have those standards in place and you start with, you know, pilots and collect data, then you can start forming policy around that and using those case studies, so that every city is not having to reinvent the wheel, and it's a constant collaboration. So, you know, we're seeing RFPs for dynamic curb management come out of cities like Columbus and Washington, D.C., and we're expecting an avalanche of cities coming and joining suit. And so really just sharing that knowledge. I'm not sure if I answered your question there, but you know, those standards are really important. And there's different companies working together to provide cities with different data points, and having those open source APIs where all of these companies can communicate with each other, and cities are avoiding vendor lock-in, and solutions are becoming very interoperable, which is really helpful for cities as we move forward.
Yeah, yeah. I want to expand on that a little bit, but so it sounds like, yeah, cities are on board, which is great. Like, what about kind of getting buy-in from businesses, whether that's, you know, the shippers or you know, people that just, you know, access the street, just, you know, storefronts, retail?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, it's really building that two-sided marketplace, right? So companies like FedEx and UPS, they spent over $40 million just in citations alone in 1 year in a city like Los Angeles. And, you know, those citations are not tax deductible, but if they were willing to pay for those spaces up front and that access to the curb, they can write it off as an expense. And then, you know, they're not having to cause, you know, public safety implications like parking in the middle of the road. And then cities are able to monetize that as well. And so it's really a win-win. What we're seeing is these fleets are excited about it, but, you know, you have to break it down. So, you know, food delivery companies, for example, have been very cooperative, and you know, we have partnership agreements in place with them to where they're sharing data. But what we've seen is companies like FedEx and UPS, it's a slower burn, and you know, they're starting to become really interested in what we're doing and tracking what we're doing. But until these pilots start to expand to a city level and really affect their bottom line, it's very hard to change you know, infrastructure within a Fortune 100 company overnight. But they do want to help solve the problem. It's just not as easy with some of these bigger companies.
Got it. Antonio, can you maybe speak to that same kind of like the city versus the business divide? Like, are your, you know, the structures, does this usually belong to an individual restaurant or store, or is it installed by the city? Like, how does that work?
It's a bit of both. But we have found challenges at times. We found this in Hudson, New York, where not necessarily with our product, but let's say you had a restaurant and then you had a retail place next door. They felt like the restaurant was getting, you know, too much attention because they had, you know, outdoor spacing, and then, you know, the UPS and FedEx guys, you know, they were complaining. I have no idea how much they spend in New York on tickets. It's unbelievable. But, you know, to Arian's point, I think that's a great way to really figure out how to get them to be able to write that off and have them be partners in that. So I concur with that. From the city standpoint, you know, they worry about homeless people gathering there, and you know, that's sometimes a tough battle. But what we found is ironically, if it's really beautiful, the homeless people are intimidated to go there. Like on 23rd and 5th Avenue, we've never had a homeless person going there. But when we had a pod in Harlem, we've had a homeless person try to go there. So, the nicer the place, the more people are just kind of like scared of it, right? They're like, I'm not gonna come close to that Rolls Royce.
I guess that's kind of opens up some bigger questions about who has access to public space, but interesting phenomenon. I mean, Adrian, I guess same question for you in the sense that, Streets for All, you're trying to build momentum for better streets. It's one thing to get a city, a politician on board, but you still need kind of a groundswell from the community, from businesses, from people that, people are inherently status quo biased, and they know that their customers come by car. You have to convince them, well, they're going to walk now. They're going to, spend more money because there's a nice dining situation. Like, how do you make that case?
It's hard to get the ball rolling with that, admittedly. We had some difficulty. We had to, when we were getting our permit in order to do the open streets event we had a few months back, and a lot of businesses didn't want to sign on until other businesses did that. So we just kind of came and presented the facts and showed them some data about how open streets mean more business. And I mean, I don't know if anybody on this call is familiar with Koreatown in Los Angeles, but it's notorious for having the worst parking, the worst traffic in the city. And so people were just worried, like, well, this is just going to make the problem that much worse. I'm like, but will it? Like, something has to be done about this. And if it's already, parking is already too bad where people aren't going to drive here, maybe make it in a way where people are going to want to ride their bike or walk or take a scooter here. And that's exactly what happened. And certainly once we got more signatures for this petition to have the event, a lot more businesses were amenable to sign on to that. But several of them did realize that an event like this is going to draw people there, especially the places like coffee shops and boba shops. But yeah, I mean, there's some people that and business owners that were just not able to be convinced, and were just felt that everything was going to just crumble down having the street closed for a day. But it seemed like it just really benefited everybody to do that project.
So once you kind of get one of these off the ground, are you then able to more easily do it again recurringly, or take that to another neighborhood, another city, and sort of say, hey, we've got this case study, like we can show that sales went up 15%, these people had this fantastic day outside. Like, are you kind of tracking those points to then make the case next time?
Yes, we certainly want to do subsequent events like this. And this was done in kind of a way to pilot a bigger initiative that we have in Koreatown, to turn a half-mile stretch of 6th Street into a pedestrian plaza. And so doing just a 2-block segment was enough to give the community a taste of what this could be like. And the survey data just resoundingly said, we want this. We want more streets like this. We want open space. We want a place where we can sit and enjoy dinner and the company of our friends. So we gave that info to the council office, and like, all right, your move. Let's make this happen. So we're hoping something will come of that.
Got it. Yeah, gotta maintain that momentum.
Yeah, we found like none of them want to be first, and the bigger the company you work with, like the easier it is for other people to get on board. Like, we were in Manhattan at Italy, like people were like, well, permitting and this and that, and we did it there, and then we went to Queens, and they're like, you can't do this. You're going to get in trouble for this and all this. So I said, so how is it working on 23rd and 5th Avenue? I said, do you see any citations? Do you see any problems there? Like, so there was a lot of, even before we did Italy, a lot of people were like, the government's never going to allow you to do that. We actually had one city say, the plow truck won't be able to go around it. And then we just stuck it in their face every single time that we did a successful project. We're just like, well, we did it here, we did it here, we did it here, we did it there. So just, you got to go ahead and succeed without them and prove people wrong. And then make sure you capture, some of the successes that you have, because a lot of people that work in government, they're just risk averse.
Yes, that's sort of perseverance. Thinking about sort of going from initial, deployment to sort of maintenance. Arian, like, what is the kind of, like, as the life cycle matures, like, how do you keep people compliant? How do you kind of keep infrastructure up to date and running? How do you, make sure everyone still follows the rules? Like, once the initial excitement wears off?
Yeah, so it's the carrot and the stick, right? So we're doing things like incentives for these fleets to sign up, but without enforcement, what we've seen, like there's been a lot of curb reservation apps where you can reserve a spot, but then there's no enforcement, and so you have somebody coming in and parking in a 10-minute loading zone for 3 hours. It kind of defeats the purpose. And so, what these cameras do is not just collect data that's valuable for the city, but they're able to enforce where, state law permits and city law permits. And in some cases, we're having to modify policies in cities like San Francisco to allow for automation of billing and enforcement, so that it doesn't have to be an actual officer to come put the ticket on the windshield. What we're taking is a different approach, where instead of issuing like a $75 in place like San Francisco, $150 fine, we're just asking these fleets to pay for the time spent at the curb. And so, by using technology like ALPR and logo recognition, we're able to collect on a monthly basis an invoice of all of that time spent at the curb. Those fleets then, pay for that time on a monthly basis. People who do not, play by the rules would get a citation. And, over time, what we're seeing with the proper signage, we're trying to prevent as much of that enforcement as possible and make it a smooth, seamless transaction for fleets to come in and out of. And ultimately reduce some of these numbers. Like, we've reduced double parking by up to 64% in some of the cities that we're working with, and reduced parking caused traffic by 20%. And so over time, we're hoping those numbers will continue to increase. Adoption on the commercial side is going to take a little time, but we're doing as much as possible to communicate with them, get their adoption of it while we're crafting the program, so that we're not hitting them with something, but they're a part of something, creating those frameworks. And so
makes perfect sense. So we're getting some great questions flowing in the Q&A box. Everyone, please keep those coming. My colleague Luke will start reading those out in a moment. I think before we switch over to Q&A, I'm curious from each of you, sort of like, if you were to sort of say, like, what's the key thing you've learned from the last 18 months of pandemic, and how that relates to sort of open streets, public space? What's the most important lesson you've learned? So Antonio, why don't you start?
I think one of the most important lessons to realize is that, not every person is your friend, especially when you're dealing with city and you're proposing new projects. Like if you're dealing with somebody that manages facilities, they hate you because you're changing everything for them, and they do not get a pay raise. And if it works well, it doesn't help them look good. It may help the mayor look good. It may help a community specialist look good. So, understanding your audience, like we got the mayor of a city to give us a private street based on some relationships that we had in the city. And a reporter caught wind of that, and he hated it. He was just like, why you? How dare you get this? And he did everything to stop it from happening. And we thought he was our friend, and he wasn't. So make sure you have the right allies. Make sure you know who does not want to see things change. That's very important.
Yeah, good point. Aryan, what's your key takeaway been?
I think the biggest takeaway for me is times have definitely changed. Consumer behavior has shifted. People are buying things differently. They're making a lot more online purchases, but also people want to get back out. And so it's going to be a mix of taking the lessons learned over the past year and adapting to them, but then also working on getting things back to normal. And local businesses more than ever need help from cities, and some of these on-demand delivery companies have become the lifeblood of local businesses and connecting customers with local goods and services. And so I think we're all just learning to deal with the new normal, but But I think we're headed in a good direction. I mean, in some ways, COVID has caused a catalyst for cities to implement some of these curb management strategies and initiatives. I mean, if a few years ago you would have talked to a city about using computer vision to automate everything at the curb, they would have been like, oh yeah, 10, 20 years down the line. But we've seen an acceleration in demand. And so, yeah, we're happy to continue to work with cities to help in whatever way we can, and local businesses, of course, and stakeholders.
That's great. And Adrian, what's your key lesson been?
My key takeaway is that prioritizing streets for personal vehicles is not the future. We have to be more imaginative and think much more broadly than that. It's a waste of curb space to use it for private vehicles. And we've been seeing streets getting clogged up with delivery vehicles double parked. And it's just simply not good for business. It's not good for the health of the community when cars are focused in that way. So we have to just be better about our curb space use and redesign it in such a way that it prioritizes the most people and the greatest good in the community.
Yep, makes total sense. All right, so I'm going to welcome my Curbivore crew colleague Luke back on stage here to handle some Q&A from the audience, and everyone please keep the questions flowing. Yeah, take it away, Luke.
Thanks, Jonah. Great conversation, guys. That was really interesting stuff. Yeah, as Jonah said, I would love to kind of pivot over some audience questions now. We've got a lot of great ones coming in. Over here in the Q&A section, I'd encourage anybody who hasn't submitted a question yet, drop one in there. We got about 10, 15 minutes here to kind of run through some. And typically for me, this is one of the best parts of the show because it really allows sort of the experts on the ground to ask questions that are maybe more informed by experience than what we know and they're kind of from reading the news and talking to our colleagues. So I love to hear this part. Warren L asks, what are some cities that have done best at this domestically? Domestically, I think he means the US. And by best, I think he means what cities are, really thriving and succeeding at reallocating road space from, traditional uses to, streeteries, parklets, cycleways, that kind of stuff. I feel like, Automotus, you probably have Arian probably has a pretty 360 perspective on this from working with a lot of different cities. Maybe we'll start with you and we can go around.
Yeah, a few shout outs that I would give would be cities like Santa Monica that I mentioned, Los Angeles, Pittsburgh, that's automating billing and enforcement, San Francisco, that is in the middle of working on new policies, and then Columbus, Ohio, and Washington, D.C. that recently issued RFPs around dynamic curb management. Those are some key cities that are very proactive and leading the charge on some of these pilots.
Cool. Do we have anything you want to add, Adrian or Antonia?
I have nothing to add to that.
No, nothing for me either.
Good list. Okay. So another question we have here from Sergey. Sergey asks, most of the new street facilities, amenities, and services require storage space to keep supplies, bots, batteries, etc. How is this challenge solved without taking additional floor space? Okay. So I think the question here is, a lot of new players on the curb, whether they're delivery bots or scooters or diners, it's a zero-sum game, right? We're all trying to compete for a limited amount of real estate on the curb. So basically, Sergey is asking, how do we start to who are the winners and who are the losers in your ideal world, right? And where do we kind of net out in terms of space allocation? Adrian, maybe do you want to start on that one?
This is a really good question, and unfortunately, I don't really have the answer to this. But I see this problem in my community, which has a lot of scooters and a lot of e-bikes that you can rent, and that a lot of the delivery couriers are using in my community. So I hear a lot of stakeholders complaining about scooters and e-bikes blocking the right of way. And I'm personally a fan of them, but I really sympathize with ADA access being hurt as a result of stuff being blocked. But there are some people that just hate them no matter what. And even when access is not blocked, they're just going to be angry at the mobility devices. So I would love to know the answer to this.
Antonio or Ariane,
I mean,
any thoughts?
we have batteries included, in all of our solar enclosures. They're handicap accessible.
Yeah, it feels different for you because you need to actually build the infrastructure, and so it has to sort of be you build to the ADA spec. Whereas some people, as I think to Adrian's point, if you're just a delivery worker kind of dropping off an e-bike really fast and it gets tipped over into the sidewalk, who's responsible there, and can that be fixed in a speedy way? Ariane, I thought maybe you had some thoughts there.
So one of the things you guys don't see is, we have a product called Solify Bliss. And that does e-scooter charging, and it keeps everything dockable. So we actually solved that problem. It has batteries, solar, everything included, because you see in many different cities that these e-scooters are just knocked over the floor. So we want to prevent that. And our solution also detects if there's anything wrong with the e-bike before it's dispersed to somebody.
Ariane, I feel like you were trying to get in there for a second. Jim, what do you want to add?
Yeah, definitely. And just disclosure, in my past life, I had a scooter company. And so I'm very familiar with the challenges that they cause cities and also how they help cities. But, going back to the digital relationship between cities and private companies, I mean, when scooters got dropped off in cities by the thousands, the cities did not have any heads up, and they had no clarity on where the scooters were being placed. And so the Open Mobility Foundation actually was created from something called MDS, which was the implementation of the mobility data specification. And that is the way cities are able to operate with private scooter operators. And there's several data points that they require in order for a permit to be obtained in many of these major cities. And so if I had a scooter company and I wanted to operate in Los Angeles, I have to sign off that I'm willing to share 4 different data points and APIs. One is the start location, and no personally identifiable information, but they need to know the start location, the end location, the duration of the trip, and just where the scooters are being parked. And so now what they have is standards on where the scooters can and cannot be, and they're using technology to geofence certain areas like the Santa Monica Boardwalk or the Venice Boardwalk, so that the scooters now automatically know once you cross that line, they can, from the cloud, slow down that scooter to 3 miles an hour and disable it. And so this is where technology is now giving cities a way to help manage some of these problems. And so we're working on something called CDS, which is the curb data specification. And so some of the same ways, things like MDS and open source APIs that have been created to help give digital tools to cities have helped with the scooter problem. And MDS has been supported in over 80 cities internationally. And so we're excited to create some of the same standards for the curb.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I mean, I'm from a business called Micromobility Industries, which is a media startup sort of focusing on scooters and e-bikes and so on. So I have a lot I could add to this too, but I'll keep it moving right now. And I appreciate everyone's thoughts. It is interesting, right? Especially with some of these new technologies coming down the pike around camera-based positioning and GPS and all that kind of stuff, how you can geofence and kind of enhance accessibility through software. So I've got a question here from Brooke. Brooke asks, are you seeing a backlash to open streets? So, to me, this is a great question because, I think we've touched on it a little bit, but I see it personally when I work with micromobility. Sometimes the opponents of progress are better organized than the people trying to create change. I think motorists and drivers are often very well organized when it comes to micromobility and pushing for keeping their space. I guess, is there a backlash you're seeing communities that have done really strong open streets initiatives, or are people mostly happy with it in your experience?
I'm seeing that people like it for the most part, but a lot of the people who support these things aren't as vocal as you mentioned. So the people that want the status quo are generally the loudest. Streets for All was the main advocacy organization behind bringing slow streets to Los Angeles. And in the initial rollout, it was just A-frame signs in the middle of the street with some signage identifying it as a slow street. And so those signs were easily knocked over, and there were plenty of motorists that were intentionally destroying those signs so they could try to eliminate the slow street altogether. I had some threats while I was volunteering to maintain the signage, which was absurd, but I mean, the backlash is strong from the people who oppose this kind of stuff. But also when I was volunteering to maintain the slow streets, we also had a lot of people express their support. People were thanking me for doing this because it was curtailing street racing and people doing donuts in the middle of the street. So I think the vast majority of stakeholders want some kind of change. But there's a small, very vocal minority of people that want to maintain the status quo and just use the streets for their own selfish purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it makes total sense. And then, yeah.
Sorry, to add to Aryan's point, I was in Austin once, and that geofencing thing, man, that messed me up. I was going from one area and it slowed me down. I was like, whoa, what's going on here? And I had to jump on another one. I was so upset. In Birmingham, Alabama, you can't take it after 11 p.m. From 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. That
Really?
messed me up as well.
Yeah, there are all kinds of restrictions that make usage difficult for micromobility right now. Restrictions that I think a lot of us wish we could put on cars sometimes, but unfortunately we can't. But I hear what you're saying, Adrian. I think it's interesting. So going back to the core topic of this webinar, like, what are some political strategies then? So, I think you have a very clearly organized opposition sometimes to changing the way streets are used. How do people get organized on the other side? Is it restaurants and retailers saying, hey, our business has picked up since the bike lane was put in, we want to advocate in favor of it? What are some coalitions you can build? Thinking outside of just the kind of people who show up, time and time again in the kind of urbanist circles. How do you start to expand the pie?
Yeah, that's a main goal of ours at Streets for All. We try to connect with neighborhood councils in the area. We did a lot of work in this last election cycle for neighborhood councils to try to get progressives elected who are going to support these sorts of initiatives. So having the right people in office, even at the smallest level like neighborhood council, really matters. Because the city council offices will listen to the neighborhood councils. If they submit a letter of support for a project like this, they take that to heart. And so we had a lot of success with these projects based on the initial neighborhood council support. And we've built a large coalition at Streets for All as well of businesses, citizens, various stakeholders all over the city of Los Angeles. And so when we do a call to action, we now flood the elected representatives to let them know that we want this. So we succeeded at drowning out those few yet loud NIMBY voices. So now if an elected official ignores us, they're doing it by choice instead of simply not hearing these voices.
Gotcha. There's a question here, it's actually from Warren again, and I like to get to everyone before I get to someone do twice, but I do like this question because I think it's an interesting frame. He asks, what are some sort of the revenue changes do cities and businesses see from an open street? So how can, how does that change the bottom line, both for cities and local businesses? Have you guys got any data on that? I think that could be a good thing to look at.
I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I have researched this before when I was doing my presentation for the 6th Street revitalization project. But I believe, if I remember correctly, was it 14th Street in New York did something like that, where they closed it off to private vehicles during certain hours and it's only open for delivery vehicles and buses, and really prioritizing people and micromobility and cyclists. And I want to say that the revenue increased, like it was between 10 and 15%, if I remember correctly off the top of my head. And so, I mean, what business wouldn't love that? You can't deny those kinds of numbers. And now that we're seeing other cities all over the place doing events like this on the weekend, like now West Hollywood is doing a weekly open streets event on the weekends. Santa Monica is now opening Main Street like this. Cities would not be doing this if it wasn't good for those businesses.
Antonio, or anything to add there? I think Arnie might be muted, but I think it was a no. Based on
Adrian covered it really well, and I got a chance to check out the Main Street. They did it. They're doing it once a month on the 3rd week, I think, for 3 months, and it was great to see everybody out and in the middle of the street, kids playing around, not having to worry about any sort of cars. But no, in short, nothing to add.
Cool. So I think we got time for one more here, just going right down the line. It looks like there's one from Natalie, and Natalie asks, digital infrastructure beautification were identified as necessary for successful street interventions. Attention to pedestrian accessibility requirements also necessary. So how would you recommend agencies ensure they're meeting disabled access accessibility requirements into these interventions to ensure they're usable by all pedestrians and customers? We talked about this a little bit earlier, but I think it's a different way of looking at it, which is, what are sort of the mechanisms of requirements? Like, how do you actually start to create responsibility? I think you mentioned, sort of geofencing for scooters. Certainly, I think, Antonio talked about sort of building accessibility into infrastructure. Are there anything else we can do in terms of maybe, on the city side, what cities can do? Because those are both sort of put upon either the vendor or the operator or the customer or the retailer. What are some things cities can do maybe to sort of ensure accessibility, maybe as they start to permit more interventions on safe streets?
A big recommendation that I have is that cities take space away from the street versus the sidewalk. If they're going to do an alfresco setup, that setup should be where parking meters were, or maybe even their own parking lots. But it breaks my heart when I see these setups on the sidewalk where a stroller or a mobility device cannot get through. That's not a recipe for a healthy city. If it's even more difficult for people with mobility needs to get around.
Right. It feels like, cars have this sort of untouchable part of the street, and everyone else has to kind of compete for a pittance of little space, and it's designed to fail because, how could it possibly work when you're trying to balance all these conflicts of needs in this little band of pavement? So it makes total sense. Anything, to add from either, Ariane or Antonio there? In terms of how cities can, it seems like both you guys have talked about a little bit how you're working to ensure accessibility through what you do. I think it'd be interesting to think about, what cities can do on their end. So it's not just, it's a two-way kind of effort.
I mean, I think cities just have to have innovation managers, innovation directors that can be able to work on stuff like this. Somebody that thinks different to work with innovators. And, I think that's a good start.
Yeah, having a change agent that's willing to spend political capital, I think is really important. I mean, what we try to do is we try to find an executive sponsor that is really passionate about solving some of these problems, because, it's not easy. And sometimes, you have to go to the board, and, having support early on from that executive sponsor can really help move the needle. But yeah, other than that, I would say paying attention to what other cities are doing and policies and keeping up. A lot of this is policy hurdles, right? And so getting past the policy for us and for, in terms of challenges that cities are facing is probably the main one. And they need recommendations on what policies to propose to match up technology with today's problems, because a lot of these laws that were created decades ago, and they don't suit the problems that cities are facing today.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I think that was a great place to cut it. We're a little over our time limit actually, but I really want to thank you guys all for coming. And to your last point, Ariane, about creating avenues of information for cities to learn from. I hope we were able to accomplish some of that today. And thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, our guests, Ariane, Antonio, and Adrian, and thank you for everyone for attending. We're going to make a recording of this call and this webinar available soon. Maybe before we go, could everyone just let the audience know where they can reach you, what the best way to get in touch is, or follow you, or whatever it might be? Maybe we'll start with Adrian.
Yeah, you can email me at adrian@streetsforall.org. You can also follow me on Twitter at HoffBeatenPath. And yeah, that's the best place.
Cool. You can drop that in the chat too. I see the others have done that. So really quick, Antonio, best way to reach you?
Email or LinkedIn.
Cool.
My email is ad@solar-fi.com. I'll put it in the link as well.
Great. And Ariane.
Yeah, I think the best way is by email. I dropped the link in the chat. Also, I am dropping a link to my LinkedIn, which, yeah, people can connect directly with this link.
Cool. Hopefully some people reach out to connect. I think we gave them a lot to think about today. So great conversation, everyone. Thanks for your time, and talk more soon. This has been fantastic. Talk to you later. Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Until next time.